"Don't come tomorrow," my sister texted. "Dad wouldn't want a scene." I stared at the message for a long time. "You're banning me from my own father's funeral." She replied instantly, "You're not family anymore." 3 days later, the police called me. "My name is Allison Carter, and I'm 34 years old. I work as a public records researcher for a small legal firm. It's not a glamorous job. Most of my family spent years calling it boring, pointless, a waste of a mind." My brother once laughed at a holiday dinner and said, "So you just look up old papers all day?" Everyone laughed with him. I smiled and said nothing. That was my role in the family. The quiet one. The responsible one. The one nobody worried about because I never demanded attention. My sister was the bold personality, always the center of every room. My brother ran a piece of the family's small business and acted like that made him royalty. Me, I lived closest to our father during the last years of his life. I drove him to hospital appointments. I helped him sort his bills when his hand started shaking too much to hold a pen. I organized his paperwork, sat with him during long, quiet evenings, and made sure he ate properly when he didn't feel like cooking. The rest of the family rarely noticed. They showed up at Christmas, took photos, and left. I stayed. I wasn't rich or glamorous. I didn't run the family business or show up in fancy cars. But I had something they didn't expect: patience, memory, and the habit of keeping records. When my father passed, I didn't find out through a phone call. I found out through a 2-line text message sent at 11:43 at night. No warning, no softness. Just words on a screen telling me he was gone. Being told not to come to my own father's funeral felt like the final door slamming shut, quietly, in the dark, while everyone else stood on the other side pretending I didn't exist. If you've ever been pushed aside in your own family, I know that feeling. Hit subscribe and tell me your story in the comments. I read them all. Sometimes the quiet ones carry the truth no one else wants to hear. If you believe people like us deserve a voice, tap like or click hype. Let's go. The morning after that text, I called my brother. I needed someone to explain what was happening. I needed one person in my family to act like a human being. He picked up after 3 rings. His voice was flat, almost rehearsed. "You made Dad's life stressful," he said. "It's better if you stay away." I asked him when the arrangements had been made. He didn't answer. He just told me it had all been handled and that I should respect the family's wishes. Then he hung up. I sat on my kitchen floor in the early morning silence and realized the funeral had been planned, organized, and scheduled without a single word to me. Not even a courtesy call. I went anyway. I couldn't stop myself. I drove to the church and parked across the street, telling myself I would just watch from a distance. Through the open doors, I could see people filling the pews. Relatives I hadn't seen in years, neighbors, old family friends. The air outside smelled like fresh-cut grass and exhaust from passing cars. It felt wrong to be grieving on a normal street while the world just kept moving. Then someone saw me, an aunt near the entrance. I saw her eyes land on me and immediately turned toward my sister. My sister looked over, said something to the people around her, and the small group near the door shifted, closing together like a wall dot. My aunt leaned toward my sister and my sister's voice carried clearly across the steps. She wasn't invited. Heads turned, people stared. A few guests whispered to each other. I felt the heat rise in my face and I walked back to my car without saying a word. That night, I opened social media and found a gallery of funeral photos posted by cousins and relatives. Smiling faces, black dresses, captions like a beautiful farewell for a wonderful man. My name appeared nowhere, not in a caption, not in a comment, not even in the background of a photo. I had been edited out of my own father's death. 3 days after that, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. A detective introduced himself and asked if I had a few minutes. "Miss Carter," he said carefully, "were you aware your father's house was emptied the night before his funeral?" I stopped breathing for a second, and according to neighbors, he continued, "Your siblings were the last people seen moving things out." The week that followed was the loneliest of my life, and also the most clarifying. My brother had changed the locks on my father's house. When I asked about his personal belongings, his books, the watch he always wore, the framed photos from the hallway, my brother told me everything already belonged to them. He said it like it was obvious, like I should have expected it. "You weren't around enough to deserve anything," he told me. I thought about all the hospital trips, all the evenings I spent sitting quietly beside my father while he slept, all the times I scanned documents for him, organized his files, helped him make sense of paperwork. His aging eyes couldn't read easily anymore. None of that, apparently, counted for anything. Then the rumors started. Whispers moving through the family that I had abandoned my father during his illness, that I had been absent, that I had caused him stress and disappointment. Relatives who had been warm toward me for years stopped answering my calls. I tried to attend a small family gathering at my aunt's house and sat down quietly at the table. Someone muttered, just loud enough for the room to hear, "Now she shows up because she wants money." I left before the food was served. My sister made the final announcement at the end of that week. She called me, which surprised me, but her tone was brisk and businesslike. She told me our father had left everything to her and our brother. She said I had been removed from the will. She told me I should accept it and move on with my life. Then she said, almost kindly, "This is really better for everyone." I said nothing. I just listened. And after I ended the call, I sat very still for a long time. They thought humiliation would make me disappear. They thought the combination of shame, exclusion, and a locked door would be enough to end the conversation. What they didn't understand was that grief, when it has nowhere else to go, sometimes turns into focus. And I had been trained my entire career to pay attention to details that other people overlooked. I started quietly going through my own files. My job involves tracking public records, legal documents, archived filings, deed registrations, financial disclosures. I have spent over a decade learning how to find information that people assume is buried or forgotten. Most of my family mocked that skill for years. They were about to learn why it existed. During my father's illness, he had asked me to help him organize his important paperwork. He was meticulous about records, always had been, and he trusted me to scan and store digital copies of documents he was afraid of losing. I had done exactly that, quietly and carefully, without drawing attention to it. What they didn't know was that my father trusted me with more than errands. He trusted me with records. While sorting through my archived files late one night, I found scanned copies of bank statements from accounts in my father's name. The documents showed a pattern of large transfers made during the final weeks of his hospitalization. The amounts were significant. The timing was precise. Then I found something else, a property deed change, recorded only 4 days before the funeral, filed while my father was still sedated in a hospital bed. I sat back in my chair and looked at the screen. The hum of my computer fan was the only sound in the apartment. For the first time since the funeral, I wasn't just grieving, I was starting to understand. I knew I couldn't walk into a courtroom alone with scanned copies and a quiet certainty. I needed someone with legal standing and institutional memory. I thought about Mr. Daniel Harper, an elderly lawyer who had handled several matters for my father going back decades. He was careful, and he had known my father long enough to understand his habits. I called him on a Tuesday morning. He answered with the polished courtesy of someone who had spent 50 years managing other people's crises. When I explained the situation, his first response was measured. He assumed the family had already handled the estate properly and that I was simply hurting from being left out. I understood that assumption. It was the reasonable one. Then I sent him the documents. There was a long pause on the line. "Your father never mentioned removing you from the will," he said. His tone had changed. It was slower now, more deliberate. Harper began cross-referencing the documents I provided against official filings. Within 2 days, he called me back. The amendment to the will, the one my sister had cited, had been submitted after my father was hospitalized and no longer capable of signing legal documents without supervision. The signatures were irregular. The timing was wrong. Harper's voice when he told me was quiet but firm. "If these documents are real," he said, "someone committed fraud." While Harper worked methodically in the background, my siblings continued as though they had already won. My sister began selling furniture from my father's house through an online marketplace. I saw the listings one evening, photos of chairs and lamps and a bookcase I recognized from his living room, priced for quick sale. My brother announced to several relatives that he was planning to renovate the property and sell it before the end of the year. They were moving fast, confident that I was too broken or too weak to do anything about it. Harper submitted a formal request for an official will reading at his office, which legally required the presence of all named parties in the original document. My siblings had no choice but to show up. The morning of the meeting, the conference room smelled like old paper and leather chairs, the kind of room where decisions get made and can't be undone. My siblings arrived together, dressed carefully, carrying the quiet arrogance of people who believe the conclusion has already been written. My sister set her bag on the table and looked at Harper with a practiced smile. "This should finally settle things," she said. Harper nodded politely and asked everyone to be seated. He opened the first folder without any drama. He was deliberate and unhurried, the way people are when they have something solid beneath them. The first document he presented was a certified copy of the original will, dated and notarized years before my father's hospitalization. It listed all 3 siblings equally. He read it clearly, without comment, and set it down. Then he presented the amended version my siblings had relied on. He placed it beside the original and explained, without raising his voice, that the amendment had been submitted on a date when my father was medically documented as sedated and incapacitated. It had not been witnessed by any approved party. The notary's signature on the amendment did not match any registered notary in the county. My sister's smile had faded. Then the door opened. 2 investigators from the Financial Crimes Unit walked in and introduced themselves. Harper had contacted them after reviewing the bank transfer records I had provided. The withdrawals from my father's accounts, made during his final hospitalization, were substantial enough and timed precisely enough to warrant a formal inquiry. A neighbor had already submitted a separate statement about the night before the funeral, describing a moving truck and 2 familiar faces. My sister's face had gone completely still. My brother was staring at the table. I looked at them both and spoke quietly. "I didn't come to the funeral," I said, "but I came for the truth." Harper read the original will aloud. All 3 names, equal shares, exactly as my father had intended. The fraudulent amendment and the asset removal were now formally part of a criminal investigation. The investigators asked my siblings to remain for additional questions. The room was silent except for the soft scratch of pens and the rustling of documents. My sister turned to me slowly. "You planned this," she said. I looked at her for a moment before answering. "No," I said. "Dad did. I just kept the records." The legal process moved forward carefully after that. The estate was frozen, pending court resolution. The investigation into the transfers and the fraudulent amendment was ongoing, and both my siblings were required to cooperate. The house could not be sold, renovated, or touched until the court made its determination. In the weeks that followed, several relatives reached out privately. A cousin sent a long message apologizing for the comment at the dinner table. An uncle called to say he should have asked more questions earlier. I appreciated the words. I didn't rush to forgive or to forget. I simply listened and thanked them, and gave myself permission to feel whatever I felt without performing anything for anyone. I didn't attend any celebrations. There was nothing to celebrate. My father was still gone. That fact didn't change with the legal outcome. The grief was still real and quiet, and mine, but something had shifted. I had been pushed to the edge of my own family's story and treated like a footnote, and I had shown up anyway. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with patience and paper and the quiet discipline of someone who never stopped paying attention. They tried to erase me from my father's farewell, but the truth has a way of showing up even when you're not invited. Being pushed out of your own family hurts in ways people don't understand. If you've ever been excluded or treated like you didn't belong, I want to hear your story. Subscribe and share what happened to you in the comments. This community listens. And if this story spoke to you, click hype to help it reach others who need to know they're not alone. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and click hype to help it reach more people who need to hear it. Your voice matters in our community. Share your own experience in the comments below. I'm reading